The LA Kings are gearing up for a playoff push. Does that include adding at the trade deadline? We've got Austin Stanovich of The Hockey News to join us and discuss that and more on this edition of Locked On LA Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, Kings fans, welcome to Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On LA Kings your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. We'd love for you to leave us a positive comment on Apple Podcasts if you're a fan of the show. And of course, we're on YouTube. Please like and subscribe if you're enjoying this content. I'm Eddie Garcia, your host of Locked On LA Kings. I've worked in sports media the past 30 years, 20 plus years at the Fox Sports Radio Network. Also co-host of the Puck Podcast, a weekly NHL review show that's been putting out content for the past 17 years, and a passionate LA Kings fan for over 30 years. Before we get into today's special guest, I did want to give you a bit of a roadmap for the rest of this week, which is a busy one with the NHL trade deadline coming up on Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern time. So on Thursday's show, we're going to update you on any Kings news involving the trade deadline. We'll also recap the 2-1 overtime loss on Tuesday to the Canucks and preview Thursday's Kings-Senators game as well. All that coming up on Thursday's show. But for today, we have a special guest, and we are happy to welcome back to the show Austin Stanovich of The Hockey News, who covers the LA Kings. Of course, going to talk about the Kings and what's going on ahead of the trade deadline. You can follow him on X or Twitter at @Stanovich68. That's Stanovich. Hey, Austin, thanks for doing this. Good to have you back on the show.
Yeah, I'm always excited to be back on the show with you. It's always a good time.
So we have to obviously talk about what's going on with the Kings of the trade deadline, or maybe what's not going on with them. But I have said, certainly what's in consideration, whether the Kings are going to make any moves or not, is the status of the injured players they have: Adrian Kempe, Victor Arvidsson, Mike Anderson, and Carl Grundstrom. If the outlook is for them to be back for the playoffs or sooner, I could see the Kings maybe looking to add, maybe looking to hold on to Matt Roy. But if not, if the report is that those guys maybe aren't available, maybe Arvidsson won't return for the playoffs, I could certainly understand why they might want to make a move and trade a Matt Roy as well. But the reports we're hearing, and nothing officially from the Kings, is that it looks like Kempe and Anderson are going to be coming back in the coming weeks, and Arvidsson at least will be back for the playoffs. Are you hearing that as well? And do you agree that the status of those players is going to determine if the Kings do anything or not?
Yeah, that's pretty much what I'm hearing. From what I understand, pretty much everyone will be back come playoff time. I don't think there's anyone that they're planning on being out up to the playoffs even. I think they're planning on having everyone back, even Arvidsson, before the actual end of the season. So that definitely drastically changes what they can do simply from a cap space perspective. And this team does not have a lot of cap space to work with. Even currently with a couple guys in LTIR, they only have about $2.5 million of cap space to work with according to Cap Friendly. So that status it changes everything for them. It determines whether they can or cannot make moves. And because certainly it appears that Kempe and Anderson will be back soon, I know that they've been seeing red non-contact jerseys in their lockers, which usually means players have started skating on their own and will return to the group soon. So I'd expect them back in the next couple weeks. As you said, their cap space isn't an option to utilize moving forward. Victor Arvidsson, technically right now, his cap space is usable. Same with Carl Grundstrom. But again, those are two guys they expect back before the end of the regular season. So they have to take that into account. If they add someone now, if those two guys come back before the end of the season, their cap comes back onto the books, and then you are over the cap limit. And then what do you do? What do you do there? So certainly that status plays a huge role in what they can do. And I don't think they can do much because of it.
Now, we have seen teams use long-term injured reserve as a tool, right? Vegas appears to be doing it again with their captain, Mark Stone. They did it last year and then went on to win the Cup. Tampa Bay did it with Nikita Kucherov. Is that something the Kings should do with holding out Victor Arvidsson until the playoffs, assuming he can come back?
Sure, but I never think it's that simple. I think a lot of people just jump to that conclusion that, you just throw the guy in LTR till the end of the season, you just hold him out. And in theory, it's great, but in practice, it doesn't always work. Mark Stone and Nikita Kucherov both did that when they were signed to long-term, big cap hit contracts Victor Arvidsson's entering the last year, or is in the last year of his contract, and is going to be looking for another one this summer. Probably not with the Kings because of their cap situation. So I don't know how interested he would be in only playing those 4 games that he got into. He probably wants to get into a couple games before the playoffs to try and get his game back up to speed and to try and showcase what he can in the limited time he has this season to showcase that to teams this summer. So certainly if the opportunity presented itself, I think Mark Stone ruptured a spleen or something like that. I mean, if Victor Arvidsson or Adrian Kempe ruptured their spleen, yes, maybe this would be an option for them, but that obviously isn't what happened. Players don't typically want to sit out 20 games while they're healthy. I mean, it's just not reality. If there was 5 games where they might have been healthy, sure. They might say, fine, I'll just sit out the last 5 games, help this team out. But if we're talking 15 to 20 games, there aren't many players in the league who are going to want to do that. Like Trevor Moore said last night when he was asked about ice time, every guy in the league wants to play as much hockey as possible. That's what they're there for. So the idea that they're going to want to willingly sit out while healthy just has never seemed realistic or as easy a solution as people make it out to be, especially when you're talking about guys who don't have the safety net of a long-term, very lucrative contract like some of these guys that have done this in the past have.
Now, Kings defenseman Matt Roy is clearly the guy in the spotlight right now, unrestricted free agent at the end of the year, in line for a raise. With the Kings cap situation, as you've mentioned, seems unlikely they'll be able to re-sign him. You hate to see him walk for nothing, but if the Kings are going to be healthy for the playoffs, you can understand why they'd want to hold on to him to give them their best shot at doing something in the postseason, which was the big goal they talked about at the beginning of the year. So do the Kings keep him, and how likely is it that they could re-sign him?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Kings at this point are certainly going to keep them. Whether or not they should keep him is kind of a different topic for me. I really think they should explore the option of moving him. Like you said, there's a very high possibility they do end up losing him for nothing. If that's the case, I mean, I think you have to look at this team and say, realistically, do we think this team can compete for a Stanley Cup? I don't think they can. I think even before all the moves that happened today, I think it was a long shot. I think after the moves that we've seen around the league today, it is going to be extremely difficult for them to do any serious damage in the playoffs. And if that is the case, losing Matt Roy for nothing to maybe win at most a single round just doesn't really make sense to me. It's not the best use of your assets. And I think that's where there needs to be a little more realisticness. Feels almost disrespectful to them, but there needs to be some level of pragmatism of acknowledging where this team is at that I don't think we've really seen this season from the front office. Because again, I don't see how you look at even some of the teams in division, like what Vegas is doing, and then you look across in the Central, the Dallases, the Colorados. Again, I mean, at best you're maybe winning a round, and I get people say once you get in, anything can happen, you get hot, all that, and sure, but realistically, this team can't view itself as a cup contender. So are they going to trade Matt Roy? No, I don't think they are. Should they? I think they should be exploring it, even if they won't. And then are they going to re-sign him? I really don't know. I believe it was either Bernstein or John Hoven reported that they were exploring that option recently. I think it would be, absurd to re-sign Matt Roy, and not because Matt Roy isn't a good player. Matt Roy is a very, very solid defenseman. I think he walks into, if not 32 top fours in the NHL, very close to it. He's a bona fide top 4 NHL defenseman. The problem is he's going to want a pay raise. He's not going to want a short-term contract. So if you do sign Matt Roy to what would probably be a 4 to 5 year contract at $5 million plus, one of two things happen. You either block Brandt Clarke's pathway into the top 4 for the next 4 or 5 years because you're paying Matt Roy this big contract, which can happen. Brandt Clarke at some point in that time period, probably sooner rather than later, needs to be given a chance in the top 4. Or Brandt Clarke takes that top 4 spot, and now you're paying Matt Roy on the third pair that $5 million plus for at least the medium-term future. Neither of those things are good for the Los Angeles Kings. So same thing, whether or not they're really interested in signing Matt Roy, whether or not they even could. I mean, I'm sure they could make it work if they really wanted to. I don't think they should, and not because Matt Roy isn't good, just because this team isn't in a place to be able to give Matt Roy the kind of money he deserves and what he'll get in the open market.
We're going to have more trade deadline talk with Austin Stanovich. Could the Kings do something with their goaltending position? We'll talk about that next here on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. I need to let you know that we are headed to the playoff stretch run for the LA Kings, who are looking to hopefully do something in the playoffs. But even if they don't do something this postseason, you could win big by playing daily fantasy hockey with the Sleeper app, the official daily fantasy app of Locked On LA Kings Network. Sleeper is our number one choice for daily fantasy sports, especially daily fantasy hockey, because with Sleeper, you can win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy hockey contests. All you have to do is pick whether stars like Austin Matthews, Nathan McKinnon, Nikita Kucherov are going to record more or less based on Sleeper's projections for things like goals, assists, plus minus for any given game. And you can win 100 times bet on your Sleeper app if you correctly predict the outcome of 8 player stats. You heard me right, Kings fans. You can win 100 times your money playing daily fantasy hockey with Sleeper. So start paying attention, nail your picks, and you can win big. Use the promo code LOCKEDONNHL, and you can get up to $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's LOCKEDONNHL. Use the code Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availabilities. And did you know that even if you have a 401k for your retirement, you can still have an IRA? Robinhood has the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April the 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar you transfer in from another retirement account with a 3% match. That's right, no cap on a 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. This offer is good through April the 30th. Start getting started at robinhood.com/boost. Subscription apply, fees apply. Again, that is robinhood.com/boost. And now for some legal information. Claim as of Q1 2024 validated by Radius Global Marketing Research. Investment involves risk, including loss. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for 1 year from the date of the first 3% match. Must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years. 3% matching on transfers is subject to specific terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA available to U.S. customers in good standing. Robinhood Financial LLC, member SIPC, is a registered broker-dealer. All right, we've got more with Austin Stanovich of the Hockey News to talk about the LA Kings and what's going on potentially at the trade deadline for the Kings. And Austin, I know that some have suggested the Kings need to do something to upgrade in net. I know that Linus Ullmark of Boston has been mentioned. Oh, by the way, he has a 16-team no-trade clause. But what are the odds the Kings could do something to upgrade the situation in net?
I think the odds they do something pretty low, frankly, and I think standing pat, especially with goaltending at the deadline, makes a lot of sense for the Kings just because Cam Talbot and David Rittich have played very well recently. Cam Talbot obviously had that kind of blip while the team was struggling. He wasn't playing very well, but he looks like he's recaptured most of that early season form, and I think as long as they are a little more conscious with his deployment and they don't try and overplay him like I think they did at the beginning of the year, they can rely on him for pretty solid goaltending down the stretch. So I don't see a obvious upgrade that they can go and get, right? Like there's not a like last year they were able to go get Jonas Korpisalo, who was a pretty clear upgrade on as good as Phoenix Copley did when he came in. It was a pretty clear upgrade on Phoenix Copley. Obviously, it was an upgrade on how Jonathan Quick was playing last season, and that doesn't seem to be available because Cam Talbot's playing well enough that it'd be very difficult to get someone who would be better than he's playing. The only way I see a potential goalie trade happening would be if Rob Blake really wanted to swing for someone like you mentioned, like a Linus Ullmark or a UC Saros or a Jacob Markstrom, someone who, yes, would improve the goaltending situation right now, but would also be a solution for the next couple of years. That's the only way a goalie trade makes sense for this team in my eyes. The difficult thing kind of goes back to what we talked about in the first part of the show, the cap situation, and also the Kings don't have a ton of assets to give up right now. I mean, Arthur Kaliev's a guy they could look to give up. I can't imagine he's super happy with the situation right now. I mean, there was kind of rumors that he was looking for a change a couple months ago. I have to imagine at this point, I mean, if he hasn't asked for a trade, I'd be, a little shocked just because the guys, they're opting to play 7 defensemen and be down a forward instead of playing him. So, I mean, I think it would only make sense for him to kind of one out. But even then, what's Arthur Kaliyev going to get you in the open market right now? It's not going to be UC Saros or Markstrom or Ullmark. So, no, I don't see a trade happening unless Rob Blake really wants to go crazy in the next 2 days and get kind of a superstar level goalie.
Well, Kings GM Rob Blake is certainly in an interesting spot. I know some have suggested or have been worried that he could do something drastic with his job potentially on the line. And he's shown in the past he's not opposed to doing something out of the box or unpopular. Pierre-Luc Dubois trade, obviously, and then he shipped out Jonathan Quick, for example. Do you think his job status factors in at all into what he may or may not do? And do you see management allowing him to make some kind of major trade to shape the future that he may not ultimately be a part of?
Yeah, I mean, I think for the first part of that question, it would have to factor into the decisions he's making. I mean, that's just human nature. Even if it's not conscious, even if he's not doing it on purpose, even if he's not sitting there saying, I have to make a big trade to try and save my job, it's going to kind of happen. Like, I mean, I think anyone, if they're in a job or a situation where they feel like there isn't much security there, they're going to do everything in their power to create that security. I really don't know what management, like the people above him's position on this is. I would think that you wouldn't want Rob Blake making significant decisions if you weren't super confident in his long-term future with this organization, but I really don't know. They also might be very confident in him still, right? Like the feeling might be, we need to see results this year, but we still believe in you. We still believe in this process. So we're going to give you all of the tools to succeed. And then if it doesn't at the end of the year, we're going to have to kind of think about the future that way. So I'm not sure what management's position on it is. And I have to imagine Rob Blake, if there is a workable trade that he thinks is going to significantly improve this team, even at the cost of some of the future, I wouldn't be shocked if he wanted to make that for job security. The one unfortunate, and depending on your view on things, fortunate thing is that his previous decisions have made that almost possible and taken it out of his hands. So I don't think there is a drastic move for him to make, even if he wanted to.
We've touched on this a little bit, or you did already, but the wheeling and dealing really ramped up recently. Things were pretty quiet for a while, but today a lot of things went down. I know you wrote about this for the Hockey News today, but the Oilers, the Golden Knights, the Stars, the Canucks, the Avalanche, they have all upgraded, at least to some extent, and they're all potential first-round opponents for the Kings. So if the Kings don't end up doing anything basically at the deadline, or maybe something very minor, how disappointed should Kings fan be? I know I'm asking you to talk on behalf of a fan base, and fans certainly are very, I mean, you'll have a segment of the fan base that if they don't do anything, it's a failure. He's sitting on his hands. And then you'll have another segment of the fan base that they do something major. What are you doing? This team's not going anywhere anyway. So, but in the end, with the other teams making these moves, do you see the Kings having to do something? Or if they don't, is it something that fans should kind of be realistic about?
Yeah, I mean, I'm generally speaking going to err on the side of kind of pragmatism and just being happy with a more realistic view of things. Because like I said earlier, I don't see this team as a cup contender. And on top of that, I don't think this team is one piece away from closing the gap between the teams ahead of them, especially after the moves all of them made today, right? Like a lot of people are saying bring Tyler Toffoli back, or, I've seen some loose links to like a guy like Jordan Eberle in Seattle. Would those guys improve this hockey team? Without a question. Is this team a Tyler Toffoli away from being a cup contender and bridging the gap to those other teams? No, they're not. I mean, they're just not. That isn't what they need to close that gap. So I think that Kings fans shouldn't be disappointed if there isn't a big move, or really even any move. I think that not making a move at this point is the right decision. I think a couple months ago, if you start like back in November, December at this point, if you're looking at this team and thought, oh man, at the trade deadline, if they can find a way to make it out, this team's really dangerous and a real cup contender, I could see it. At this point, though, I don't think that anyone should be confident in this team's ability to compete, or should be confident this team has the tools to be one piece away, to be one big addition, to be a, Casey Middlestat upgraded 2C, or a Chris Tanev on the right side addition like those other teams made, from really becoming a powerhouse. They just aren't there.
All right, we'll talk about the Kings' play of late and what their playoff potential looks like to close things out. We'll do that here next on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. No matter how the last game went, anytime you take the field, you've got your shot at greatness. Give your team the best shot at winning by recruiting more MVPs with Indeed, because Indeed is the hiring platform where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place. And Indeed is the only job site where you're guaranteed to find quality applicants that meet your must-have requirements, or else you don't pay. Indeed partners with you on every step of the hiring process. Find great talent through time-saving tools like Indeed's Instant Match, assessment, and virtual interviews. With Indeed's Match, as soon as you sponsor a post, You'll get the short list of qualified candidates with resumes on Indeed that match your job description, and you can invite them to apply right away. Plus, you only have to pay for qualified applications that meet your must-have requirements. Start hiring right now with a $75 sponsored job credit to upgrade your job post at Indeed.com/lockedon. Offer valid through March the 31st. Go to Indeed.com/lockedon to claim your $75 credit before March 31st. Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. The LA Kings will take on the Ottawa Senators on Thursday, 7:30 Pacific time. Catch every moment of the hometown broadcast of your LA Kings on SiriusXM. Use the SXM app and search LA Kings. Wrapping things off with Austin Stanovich of The Hockey News, who covers the LA Kings. And Austin, the Kings look to be back on track after that ugly slide that resulted in the dismissal of Todd McClellan. Kings are 8-4-1 under interim head coach Jim Hiller, despite some injury issues, and they have played some solid hockey of late. How you feeling about the Kings heading down the stretch?
Yeah, they look a lot closer to the team that we saw at the beginning of the year. They certainly look much different and much better from that team we saw during the slide that you mentioned that ended in Todd McClellan being relieved from his duties, as they say. And I think Jim Hiller has brought a lot of confidence back in the team. That was his and really the organization's message when they added him, is that it isn't a foundational issue, this team. It's more just this team needs to find their confidence. And after 4.5 years, messages start to go stale. You sometimes just need a new voice. I mean, the average lifespan of a coach in the NHL at this point's maybe 3 years now. I mean, Todd was one of the longer tenured coaches by the time he got fired at 4.5 years. So it's not that, shocking or that uncommon to see something like that happen. So again, I don't think this team was ever as bad as that January slide showed them to be, and they're kind of back to what we'd seen in the past. I do like that Jim Hiller is more willing to experiment with lines. He's more willing to make those in-game adjustments. And I think that's played a really big role in this kind of come back to form for him. And he's been a little more willing to give more leash to some of the younger guys, in particular Quentin Byfield. I mean, I think the 11-7 alignment we've seen the last couple of days, the best thing that has come from that has been the ability to double shift Quentin Byfield at important parts of the game. He's been playing over 20. It's huge for them. I think that willingness to not fully turn the keys over to a guy like Quentin Byfield, but that a little bit more adaptability, that a little bit more willingness to adapt and to change things up has been key for their success. And I think that they certainly, when heading into the All-Star break, the question became, is this team going to be able to make the playoffs? Are they going to fall out of the playoff race? I don't think that's a concern anymore. I think they're not completely locked into a playoff spot. I think that'd be kind of putting your chickens before your eggs and everything. But I would be very surprised at this point if they can't make the playoffs.
We talked about this a little bit. It does appear that Cam Talbot back on track. Obviously, at the beginning of the year, he was an all-star caliber goalie, but playing better of late. You confident that he does look to be back on track at this point?
Yeah, I think so. I think a big thing for Cam Talbot is having a backup that can pick up some of the slack for him. I think they were just overplaying a guy in his late 30s. I mean, almost no goalies in the NHL at this point play that like 60-game pace that we used to see from him. So then asking a guy in his late 30s to kind of play at that volume was probably just asking too much of him. I think the reset that he's able to get, not only from the All-Star break itself, but from coming back, and they kind of gave David Rick the net for a couple weeks coming out of the All-Star break, and I think that little, he said it after the last game, it wasn't only a physical but a mental reset for him too was huge. And also after that game, I asked him about the pressure being taken off of him when you have a guy like David Riddick playing so well, and that's another thing he talked about, was that when all the pressure isn't on you, when if I don't have a good game, we have another guy that can pick up the slack for me, it's really helpful. And because the Kings have that, I think I'd be confident Cam Talbot going down the stretch. Again, he's not going to be Thatcher Demko or Connor Hellebuck. The Kings don't really need him to be. He's going to be who he is, and who he is a pretty damn good NHL goalie at this point.
Now, if the Kings are healthy, and I know matchups are certainly important, but if they are healthy, how do you feel about the Kings ultimately achieving their stated goal at the beginning of the season, which was get in the playoffs and advance out of the first round?
Yeah, I think it's really dependent on who they play. If they are in that wild card matchup and they play one of Colorado or Dallas, I would not have very much confidence, frankly, not because, not even as a knock on the Kings. Colorado and Dallas team are just absolute powerhouses. I think that those would be two of my favorites to win the cup, and I don't think the Kings are there. I wouldn't be super confident in them going up against Edmonton or probably healthy Vegas. That Vancouver matchup seems very interesting to me. I think the Kings have done really well in the 2 games against them, have kind of found a way to kind of stifle their high-flying offense a little bit. That 1-3-1 obviously makes it difficult, but they also have gotten a little more aggressive when playing Vancouver to try and cut down space for them, and it's worked really well. That would be the one matchup that I think is realistic for them that I'd maybe a little more confident in, but I don't want to be overly negative about a team that's played well at points this year. But when I look at a team that has success in the playoffs, you need 2 elite players in the 3 premium positions, center, defense, and goalie. The Kings just don't have that. That's how you build a roster to really do damage in the playoffs. And I love Andre Kopitar. He's a first ballot Hall of Famer. He's playing very good hockey for where he's at in his career. He's maybe the 5th or 6th best center in the Pacific Division right now. Drew Doughty's having an incredible year. Would you confidently call him a top 10 defenseman in the NHL? Maybe at the back end of that top 10, but he's not super comfortable there. Like we just talked about, Cam Talbot's playing well. Is he a top 10 elite level goaltender? I wouldn't call him one. So when you're looking at a team that at most has 1 high-end elite player in premium positions, it makes it really hard to be confident in a team advancing even past 1 round and deep into the playoffs.
That is Austin Stanovich of The Hockey News, who covers the LA Kings. You can follow him on X or Twitter at @Stanovich68. Austin, thanks for doing this. Really appreciate the insight and hope we can do it again come playoff time.
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime. I'm always happy to come on. I love doing this podcast with you, Eddie.
All right. Appreciate it, Austin. You guys check out his work. If you follow this show on Twitter, we love to retweet his stuff, so you can check it out. And again, he posted something today about what the LA Kings have going on at the trade deadline. All right. Thanks, Austin. We'll talk to you next time.
Sounds good.
All right. That is Austin Stanovich of the Hockey News. Hope you guys enjoyed that. For you everydayers, those of you that listen and watch Locked On LA Kings every day, coming up on Thursday's show, as I mentioned, we will do a recap of the the overtime loss against Vancouver. Also preview that Kings Senators game and update you on anything that may or may not happen with the LA Kings leading up to the trade deadline. Obviously, Friday, recap that Senators Kings game and talk about anything that happens with the Kings at the deadline, and also have a Kings fan feedback segment as well. Going to be a busy rest of the week here on Locked On LA Kings. You want to send an email? The email address is lockedoneddie@gmail.com, EDDIE. You can always leave your comments if you're watching on YouTube in the comment section as well. Stay interactive with the show on social media, X, Twitter, Instagram. We're at Locked On LA Kings. I'm Eddie Garcia. Thanks for listening and watching this episode of Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Have a great rest of your day. We'll talk to you on Thursday. And as always, go Kings, go.